I've been somewhat amazed in this race. There are a few things, actually. We find out that Kamala Harris didn't spend $1 billion. She spent $1.5 billion in 3 months, effectively burning the money on the White House lawn. Okay. We find out that she had been putting money into all sorts of either musical acts, influencers, having her face in Las Vegas, getting her name on a thing over top of football games. Like all of this money that was effectively spent that did not bring in the gains that she expected to bring in. This included musical acts, where you get Joanne Reed saying Kamala Harris ran a perfect campaign. The public is just racist and sexist. Even Queen Latifah was there, and Queen Latifah never endorses. So obviously, it was great. As if there was some kind of correlation between having Taylor Swift and Swifties at your rally and getting people to vote for you. The vote for you is the issue. And when it came down to it, Kamala Harris was about what, 7 million more votes less than Joe Biden. Joe Biden brought in over 81 million votes. Kamala Harris maybe brought in what, 74 million, 73 million, give or take. In which case, Donald Trump was able to increase his margin by over 1 million votes, giving him over 75 million votes, allowing him to not just win, but also win the popular vote in this election. If you remember, in the very beginning, Harris was not doing interviews. For the first, give it 50 days, give or take, she didn't necessarily see the need to sit down because there was no pressure on her to do so. In the same way, Donald Trump was able to go through the Republican primary without having any pressure to debate because there was no reason for him to debate. He was such a clear favorite that the only thing that could have happened in a debate is for him to lose in that debate, meaning there was no upside for him. So this wasn't about what's in the best interest of America. This wasn't about giving his opponents a chance. This was about winning. And in that context, he didn't feel the need to debate. So Kamala Harris, in a similar situation, she's getting a honeymoon period. The media is not pressing her on it. And so she's able to float through going up in the polling without necessarily engaging, just kind of above it all, like a soul leaving a body. All of the attacks against Joe Biden as being genocide Joe, for whatever reason, were not added to Kamala Harris, at the very least in the very beginning. People seem to give her a grace period, give her this kind of time period to figure out, okay, what is she? And in the same way, they looked at Obama. No, she didn't have necessarily the political skill or anything, just purely from an optics standpoint. They said, thank God Joe Biden's out the race. Joe Biden's approval goes up because he got out the race. Excuse me. And the public is looking at her as, okay, she's different. And we want something different. 5% of the public said they're either angry or greatly dissatisfied with the direction of the country. And so, if the direction of the country is being led by Joe Biden on foreign and domestic policy, you have now Kamala Harris, who got into the race, and they consider her different. Her polling floats up. Then Donald Trump says, all right, we need to come up with a new plan because we need to find a way to actually hit her. And what we believe as the Trump campaign is that the moment she opens her mouth, she's going to collapse. We saw her run in the primary last time. Okay, what about now? Does she still have the same policies that she was running with in the primary? We find out the answer is no. All right. We need more pressure on her in order to force her to actually talk, or for that matter, to even debate. So what does Trump do? Trump goes on a media blitz. He goes pillar to post, talking to any and everybody about anything under the sun, including going on podcasts and social media. And he would say, I am here talking to you for hours. And she's not. So Harris starts to get asked by media, why aren't you having interviews? Why aren't you talking to us? I mean, she's there. She could just come down and talk to us off the top of her head. Why can't she do that? Which immediately pushes or puts a pressure, attention on the Harris campaign to actually have to go out and finally talk to the media. And therein lies the calamity, because it seems like Trump was right. even after having a poor debate against Kamala Harris and getting humiliated in that debate, to be frank. It wasn't as bad as Joe Biden. Nothing could be as bad as Joe Biden's debate, but it was a bad debate. You still had the situation where when Kamala Harris opened her mouth, she was not the best presenter of democratic ideals. Let's say it that way. She was running with a bad strategy to try to get conservatives to vote for her while abandoning the left. So there was that. But there was also other items that were problematic. When you ask Kamala Harris, hey, what are you going to do different? Because after all, the overwhelming majority of the public is either angry or disinterested or dislikes the direction of the country. So what are you going to do different? And at no point, despite defining herself as a new way forward or a new generation, she could not necessarily give anything that she would have done differently or will do differently, short of saying she's not Joe Biden and she's not Donald Trump. It seems that she had never even thought about the question, despite defining herself as a new way forward. All right. At the very end, she realizes, I'm falling in the polls. Something has gone wrong. And now she's in the situation where the only way for you to try to bubble up in the polling is to have another debate, which wasn't going to happen, or to talk to the media, which was already fraught with such difficulty because it's very possible that the talking to the media before is the thing that dropped her polling, even to the point where Democrats were arguing, well, Kamala Harris doesn't have to talk to the media, which is pretty outstanding or outrageous if you think about it, where they've gotten to the point of saying the candidate is so bad at talking to the media, she should just coast without doing so, without communicating with the American public. So when she's doing these interviews, if you remember, she sat down with Oprah, she sat down with Al Sharpton, she sat down with Brett Baer, and she sat down with Roland Martin. After the election, we find out that Oprah, Harpo Productions, ends up getting over $1 million for that interview. Now think about what we're saying here. Big splashy moment. Kamala sits down for a town hall with Oprah Winfrey, and nobody knows. Nobody knows. It's never disclosed that Oprah was paid handsomely to do that. This was effectively a campaign ad. There's no difference between that, since they are paying for it, and you putting out an ad saying, I, Kamala Harris, supports this ad. The difference between those things is with the ad, you have to define the fact that you paid for it. Whereas with Oprah, it just gave this impression that Oprah was fully on board. And truth be told, Oprah Winfrey might have been on board, but it taints it a bit when you tell people, by the way, she gave me $1.5 million for this. It looks bad. It just looks bad. I'm not necessarily trying to put a knife in anybody trying to get ahead. God bless. I love win-win relationships. And I want to see people prosper, especially Black people. But this stinks a bit. Or tell me if I'm wrong. It feels a little bit off to know that behind the scenes, this thing that you thought was somewhat organic and that these people just kind of agreed organically that they were paid for it. It taints it. Al Sharpton apparently ended up getting 2 checks of $250,000 each. That's a lot of money. And this was going before they sat down, or immediately after they sat down, for their interview. So he is basically getting, again, also paid for an interview. Now, they're not going to say it in those terms, but that is effectively what happened. If money is exchanging hands, an event has taken place, it is easy to point to, okay, well, the money was for the event. The money didn't come out of a sandbox. It didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't come out of a vacuum. The money was for the event. Now, do I think that our Sharpton would have voted for Kamala Harris anyway? Yes. Yes. Does it still make it feel weird that money was put on it and it was not disclosed that money was put on it? Yeah. I mean, how do I know the same conversation that they had would have been the same conversation that they would have had without the money? Meaning, just because he's voting for it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go down the same avenues when you were being, if you were not being compensated for the interview that you're effectively having. I don't think Brett Baer got any money. Look at what that interview was. And yeah, fair enough. Brett Baer is Republican. He's not necessarily going to vote for Kamala Harris. But I'm saying, even within the context of a democratic, or let's say a friendly environment, there can still be questions that are somewhat challenging that the person may not go for because they are being compensated handsomely to not do so. If you're getting money, you're trying to give the best presentation of this person that you can give, because that is why you're paid. Now, look at the NABJ for a moment, the National Association of Black Journalists. If you remember when Harris went to that, she got asked some pretty tough questions by those interviewers. I would guarantee you they were not paid in that interview. And that wasn't necessarily a hostile environment for Kamala Harris, but they still ended up on some difficult questions, especially around the issue of Gaza. And when Kamala Harris left that stage, she left that stage pissed off. I am saying, even in a world where these people would have voted for her naturally, it contorts what you may ask and the pathways you may go down when you get paid versus when you do not get paid. When you get paid, you're putting out a product. Full stop. When you're not getting paid, there's more, let's say, agency to go down pathways that may challenge the candidate, even though you are not necessarily a hostile environment. I am pointing out that there is a difference between them getting paid behind the scenes in secret and the product that they make versus not getting paid and producing a product, in which case they have more agency in it. And the goal of it is not necessarily to produce this best view of the candidate. They may have more questions that they want to ask the candidate for themselves that may not necessarily be something that the candidate would love to have to answer, that may just get fundamentally ignored or blown through or just bypassed completely because now money is on the table. The viewers who were looking at that did not know. It was not disclosed. So again, that interview was effectively a campaign advertisement. The same thing is true for the Roland man himself, Roly Poly Martin, who also got paid behind the scenes for this interview. He got a cool check for $350,000. Roland Martin.
But if you have public policy that recognizes historical barriers, and what we need to do then to overcome, first speak truth about them and then overcome them, that in the process of doing that, not only are you directly dealing with the injustices and the legal and procedural barriers that have been focused on Black folks, but by eliminating those barriers, everyone actually benefits, right? And I know that to be true. So my policies include what I know is going to have a profound impact on Black folks around economic policy, but everyone will benefit from them. I
don't know if everybody would have benefited from the policies or not. Who knows? They're sitting there having this talk as if we're just sitting here having a conversation. That's all. We're just having a conversation. Ain't nothing special happening in this moment. We're just talking. And I fully endorse this person. And I'm going to give them the best light possible that they can possibly get. Because I'm getting paid $350,000 with my no socks and dress shoes to do so. With my no socks and dress shoes to do so. I'm just saying, there's something weird about that. There's something weird about that. Yeah, it changes it. It just changes it. There's something off about that. Look, I guess I don't have an issue with it per se if people know that it is an advertisement. I mean, for God's sake, why do we put in our campaign ads paid for by Kamala Harris. I am Kamala Harris. I approve this message. Or I am Donald Trump. I approve this message. They do it because they want you to know that anything that is coming out that is coming out it with a specific context that is in the best interest of the campaign and paid for by the campaign. It is a product. I'm saying that these interviews were products disguised as interviews because they were effectively secretly paid money for those interviews. The only difference is they didn't have to say this was paid for by Kamala Harris. And maybe in retrospect, they should have been. It feels very dicey when you find out that these interviews weren't just organic interviews of people interviewing the person to get to a truth or to get something out of it that's somewhat true. Instead, we have no idea what the exact motivation of the person who was doing this interview because they were ultimately paid to produce an interview. And the interview that they produce, by definition of being paid for it, was going to be in the best interest and the best light of the person being interviewed, since that person being interviewed was paying for that particular product. I'm saying that looks dodgy as all hell. That looks dodgy as all hell. Under normal circumstances, you have to actually say paid for. In this situation, this was effectively a campaign ad without them having to say that it was a campaign ad. Emblem Fate. Africa Stream is a Pan-African organization. Blinken Red Scare claim with no evidence that they were Russian, causing a worldwide YouTube ban. Try contacting them. Yeah, if you remember, all of us got hit at the same time. I remember I was on my trip for summer vacation. I was going to Malaysia, and I'm sitting in an airport, and I see Blinken come out and give the speech, effectively saying, we are passing sanctions on RT and Sputnik's parent company. And I was like, okay, what the hell does that mean? I knew what sanctions meant. I had no idea what the impact meant because we don't work directly for Sputnik. There's an intermediary between those. And then they put out the blue, Africa Stream is also working with the Russians. And immediately, without any evidence attesting to the fact, YouTube, working as a US proxy, gets rid of Africa Stream. Utterly outrageous. The reason that the State Department is doing this, and they even noted it to some degree, they believe that RT and Sputnik is part and parcel to the reason that the rest of the world have not lumped into the Ukraine project and see it in the way that the West sees the Ukraine issue. Now, this gets across how ridiculous our State Department is. Many of the countries around the world were part of the colonial expansion by the West, whether it's the kill squads by the US putting into South America, whether it's the colonial powers in South America, whether it was colonial powers in Africa, whether it was China and the 100 years of depression or humiliation, meaning all of these areas has dealt with the West in ways that they were disadvantaged in. They can look and see with a certain degree of clarity that NATO expanded to the border of Russia, not the other way around. The US knocked over the government of Ukraine, again, not the other way around. The Ukrainian government, after the consequences of effectively overthrowing that government and having Eastern ethnic Russian Ukrainians saying, we are not going to be a part of this, a rational act, by the way, Ukrainian government goes on a killing spree, killing 14,000 ethnic Russian Ukrainians, not to mention cracking down on Russian language and passing various laws to damage the capability of political opposition. All right. The West pretends that's not true and pretends that ethnic Russian Ukrainians are not even Ukrainians. It is the most bizarre thing in the world. They pretend that a coup is a revolution of dignity, even though they didn't necessarily see it that way when all of those people raided the Capitol on January 6th. This is the way they see those things. They completely and fundamentally ignore the way we behaved in the Cuban Missile Crisis when we felt that our security was being threatened by missiles that were too close to our shores, while they simultaneously put missiles and wanting to put a military on the border of Russia itself in a country that was used as a vector for invasion by the West. My point is this: other countries around the world see it for what it is. The 13, 14% that represents the West has a point of view, but that point of view is motivated by their own self interest. They know what they're doing, they know they're putting pressure. I'm saying that whether it's Africa, whether it's South America, whether it's China, or for the matter, Asia, they see it for what it is. It's not that RT or Sputnik has that massive of a footprint that's changing the context of the world. The context of the world just wants a more peaceful world and is sick of this idea of hegemons and the rules changing to fit whatever America's interest is in the moment. Africa has become far more significant of a platform. And because it's far more significant, many of those countries in Africa have started to be more assertive on this notion of their own national sovereignty. In doing so, China and Russia has deeply ingratiated itself into Africa. China, from the sense of building infrastructure, those type of things, where Russia in the sense of security. The US is freaked out about that reality. And so Africa Stream, that gives a more honest take in a policy that may not necessarily be from a Western point of view, but it doesn't have to be. People can have their points of view based upon the things that they care about and their own value set. Well, the US said, looked at it and said, well, they're clearly working with the Russians. It gives you this idea of what YouTube is, that they would use that as a justification to basically get rid of the website. It's just outrageous. I agree with you. It's completely and entirely outrageous. All right, I'm going to end this. This wasn't meant to be long. Look, just to end where I began, it is very weird and a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Deceitful. It's a bit corrupt to secretly take money and produce a product. And that's what it is. It's a product at that point. You've taken money, it's like a commodity. And that is not disclosed. And part of the commodity is to present the best image of this particular candidate to the world, as if you are arm in arm. But again, the arm in arm is part of the product. It's not necessarily natural, nor is it an honest representation of what it would be had the money not exchanged hands. Who knows? Maybe Martin would have asked difficult questions, one or two, even though it still would have been somewhat of a safe interview that he just blew off because he got money for it. Harpo or Oprah probably would have always given the same interview, but I'm just pointing out that the fact that money changed hands make it less real, less honest. It turns it, like I said, into a product. It should have been disclosed. And I would point to you that the reason it wasn't disclosed is because it would have changed the way it looked, which would have undermined the value of the product in and of itself. That very fact alone makes my point. It looks dodgy. But I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. The Roland man was well compensated, despite the fact that Harris failed miserably. Thanks all.